Joining me now, CNN senior military analyst and former NATO Supreme Allied Commander, retired Admiral James Stavridis. Admiral, thank you for joining us. There's actually a new piece in The Atlantic by Tom Nichols, and he says, quote, senior officers of the United States military have an obligation to speak up and be leaders when it comes to Trump's actions. Do you agree with that sentiment?
I think the onus is on all of us, everybody in society. It's not just the military's job. It's the job of everybody, journalists, observers, writers, all of us need to observe the fact that, no, we are not being invaded. No, there is not a rebellion in progress. And therefore, there is no need to have active duty military troops called into our streets. That's something that doesn't require a senior military officer to observe.
Speaking of members of the military and service members who might be asked to either participate in this way or are watching their comrades do so, they might be afraid to speak out, Admiral. What is your message to them? Are they even allowed to voice concerns, or does that break protocol?
Anyone who is on active duty in the U.S. military should stay away from politics. I'm retired, but I'm a registered independent. I don't engage in political discourse one way or the other. What we want in this country, Laura, is a apolitical, non-politically engaged military. And especially if you're on active duty wearing a uniform, you should not be involved in anything that crosses a line to endorse a political candidate. Stay out of that. That's my message to anybody on active duty today.
You know, Nichols, in his piece, he called out Joint Chiefs Chairman Dan Kane as someone who should speak up to Trump. You heard his comments today where he disputed Trump's claims of there being an invasion, although I have to say he seemed to be a little bit reluctant to make that statement concisely. What did you make of that?
I know General Kane. He's a man of integrity. What I heard in his statement was the truth, that there is not an invasion in progress right now. And I think we will see our active duty folks make that observation. And I think we'll see retired folks like me make that observation. We'll see journalists make that observation. We'll see any American citizen with common sense look at the events and say, no, we're not being invaded. And therefore, Laura, there's no call to bring active duty military like a Marine combat battalion to the streets of Los Angeles. That makes no sense.
And yet, there's not just one, there's 700 Marines deployed to LA, and they're still undergoing training, as we understand. And this is all, of course, the middle of the week. The week will end on Saturday with a military parade in Washington, D.C. And of course, it's coming on the heels of this speech at Fort Bragg, the deployment of troops to Los Angeles. What do you think about the optics of all this?
Well, it's a terrible split screen, if you will, for the American public. On the one hand, we have a parade in Washington celebrating the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Army. We can debate whether that's appropriate or not. But on the other screen, we have a Marine battalion of 700 combat-trained Marines being deployed to Los Angeles to stand in the way of protests. I think that's a split screen that's hard to explain. Bottom line, I've commanded Marines in combat again and again and again. They're highly trained, shock troops who are capable of engaging and destroying an enemy. We don't want them in the streets of our cities deployed in any way that brings them in contact with civilians. I think that split screen is going to be very difficult for the Trump administration to contend with.
Let's talk about a different split screen that we saw just recently. I mean, on the one hand, I know you've been very clear that you do not think members of the military, active duty, and the like should be participating publicly in any kind of politics. But there was a moment that we saw at Fort Bragg when boos were heard with respect to certain members of elected office. But then there was another moment that elicited cheers from that same crowd at Fort Bragg when it was Trump announcing that the Army would restore the names of 7 bases that had been named after Confederate leaders. And you know, of course, there's been a transition for many of these. What are your thoughts today?
I am deeply concerned to see this administration go back to naming these bases after Confederate generals who rebelled against the United States. These are traitors. The administration is putting a bit of a fig leaf over it by renaming them ostensibly for individuals with the same name who weren't Confederate generals. This gets complicated. The bottom line is to name a base after a Confederate general who fought against the United States makes no sense whatsoever to me.
Admiral James Stavridis, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
You bet, Laura.